Hey everyone, I'm Jordy, and this is your third boss guide for Sunwell Plateau, the Undead Dragon, Felmyst. Felmyst is a two-phase encounter with about 7 million HP. Her first phase, the ground phase, is a fairly straightforward tank and spank with a couple curveballs, while the second phase, the air phase, consists of kiting skeletons that spawn and making sure that you're standing in the right section of the battlefield so you don't get breathed on by her mind-controlling fog of corruption. Here is a solid raid comp for this fight. You really only need one tank for this, but we're bringing 3 for other parts of Sunwell, so they're all included. Something to note here is you really can't have less than 2 priests in your raid for Felmyst. They're pretty much required. I'll explain why in a second. Alright, let's get into her main abilities. She has a few main abilities that you're going to be contending with, and they all need to be handled perfectly or you'll lose people to them. The first, Noxious Fumes. This is a super simple aura that Felmyst has that causes 1,000 damage every 3 seconds to anyone even remotely close to the boss. This is just unavoidable damage that you're going to have to heal through, not too big a deal. Second, Gas Nova. Gas Nova is a 1-second cast spell that Felmyst does between 2 and 3 times per ground phase. It applies a dispellable magic dot that deals 3,000 nature damage and drains 1,000 mana every 2 seconds. This needs to be mass dispelled by your priests and single target dispelled by your paladins. It's crucial that this is done quickly, as it can cause a lot of unnecessary damage unless handled correctly. Finally, Encapsulate. Felmyst targets one player and throws them into the air, stunning them and doing about 3,500 damage per second to them and anyone within range for 5 seconds. This is a lot of damage and will likely be the cause of your deaths in Phase 1. There are also a few abilities in Phase 2, but we'll just cover them when we get there. Alright, let's get into the fight. Set up your raid like so. There are definitely other ways to position for this fight, but this worked great for us, so we're just going to recommend it to you. Like Brutalis, before the boss is pulled, the raid should move to their assigned positions. Groups will be spread as to not splash and encapsulate between them, but also be in range of a mass dispel cast between 2 groups. Once everyone is in position, the tank should pull the boss or have it misdirected to them. Moving the boss early can be annoying, so it's best to just stand still to let her fully land on the ground before moving into position. Felmyst does cleave, however she has no breath or tail swipe mechanics, so position accordingly. Shortly after the pull, and periodically throughout the ground phase, she'll cast Corrosion on the tank, increasing damage taken by 100% for 10 seconds. This does have a cast time, so healers can be prepared to heal the tank through the 10-second debuff. Around 20 to 30 seconds into the fight, she'll cast Gas Nova, leaving a magic debuff on the entire raid. The priests should be assigned to cast Mass Dispel, covering 2 assigned groups, while paladins can supplement with a single dispel on priority targets, starting with the tanks, the healers, and the damage. It's important to clear all of these debuffs quickly, as they not only deal damage, but they also drain mana. While you will have an extended amount of time to regen mana during the air phase, slow dispels can quickly lead to issues in the long run. Gas Nova does have a cast time, so you can pre-cast your Mass Dispel to even further reduce the active time of the debuff across the raid, but it does cause spell pushback, so you can only get so much damage prevented. You have to eat at least a tick or 2. Encapsulate is available to be cast after the first Gas Nova, around 30 seconds in, but isn't always cast right away. We had some attempts with 0, 1, or even 2 encapsulates during the ground phase. The boss will turn and target a random player, which can include the tank, and shortly after, they will be lifted into the air and start pulsing a huge AoE around them. This does 3,500 damage per tick 5 times, 20 yards around that target. Paladins can bubble, rogues can Cloak of Shadows, and mages can Ice Block out of this, which cancels the AoE. Players within it should move away if possible to avoid the damage, and healers should quickly cast AoE healing spells on the affected group. It's possible to partial resist the ticks, so some arcane resist gear might be useful early on. After 1 minute in the ground phase, the boss will take off and the air phase will begin. 2 players will be consecutively chosen for Demonic Vapor. This will cause a green beam to follow the player for a few seconds, leaving a pool of green in its wake. Players will want to kite the beam north and south as to not cut the raid off for the following mechanic in the air phase. Shortly after the beam finishes, a second player will be chosen for the same mechanic. Skeleton ads will spawn from the pools left that need to be picked up and AoE down, ideally by your paladin tank. Standing in the pools will spawn more skeletons and leave a 10-second dot on the player, so don't. Ranged players with a threat drop should continue hit the boss while the skeletons are picked up, and then you start AoEing once threat is established. Shortly after the second beam is finished, the boss will fly to one end of the fight area, east or west, and begin to cast a breath ability along a section of the map. These will be categorized as north, center, and south. The breath will leave a fog on the area hit that will permanently mind control any player in it. Being hit by the breath has the same effect. The raid will now need to move together, north or south, in order to avoid the 3 breaths that are cast. Healers should have plenty of time to regenerate mana here, as the raid damage will be significantly lower. After the final breath, the boss will land and the ground phase will repeat. Threat is carried throughout the fight, so any ranged that continue to DPS in the air phase need to use threat drops once the boss lands to avoid dying. The fight will continue with 1 minute ground phase into an air phase until the boss is dead. Alright, some tank tips. First, keep the boss faced away from the raid for cleave. There's no tail swipe or breath mechanic like with other dragons. Also prepare a cooldown or a consumable for corrosion, as the boss's damage really spikes during this debuff. And then remember, skeletons should be grouped ASAP. They don't hit hard, and the range will be hitting the boss as long as they can. And some healer tips. First, healing requirements during the ground phase are significant, but they are extremely low during the air phase. So plan to use your trinkets and potions during the ground phase, while spending the majority of the air phase using efficient heals and regenerating your mana. Also, prioritize dispelling the tanks and healers for Gas Nova. Any ticks of the mana drain that get off will quickly lead to mana problems in the long run. And remember, when Encapsulate is cast, AoE heals should prioritize healing the group affected so as not to lose anyone. The boss's AoE aura is fairly easily healed and doesn't really require constant attention, but Encapsulate damage will quickly kill an entire group. And some DPS tips. DPS, as usual, have it fairly easy for this fight, as there aren't any individual mechanics outside of Demonic Vapor at the start of the air phase. It's advised that only ranged with a threat drop continue DPSing the boss during the first air phase, as threat is carried throughout the fight, but this shouldn't be so much of an issue later. If you can't drop aggro and are at the top of threat headed into the ground phase, run to the tank position to avoid getting the raid group cleaved. Alright, well that's it for Felmyst. I'd say she's one of the easier fights in Sunwell, and she also drops the infamous Leggings of Immortal Knight that I know everyone is very excited about getting, so good luck on that. After she goes down, you've got a little trash gauntlet to run through, and then you're on to a much more challenging fight, the Eridar Twins. I'll cover them in the next one, so make sure to subscribe to catch that as soon as it drops. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.